Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. I have visited 6 Cedar Fair parks, and they happen to be the ones that are often considered the best 6. Cedar Point, Kings Island, Canada's Wonderland, Knott's Berry Farm, Carowinds, and Kings Dominion. Kings Dominion, I think, might be the weakest of these. Not only that, it might be my least favorite of them because I think it's a little overrated. It is a good park, I had fun when I went, but I'm going to go over my most recent experience and discuss some of the things that are not my favorite and why I'm not quite up there in the same hype train as a lot of people are, calling it one of the best parks in the US. Let's talk about this now. So first off, I went on 2 different days. I arrived on a March Saturday afternoon with favorable weather. I went back the Sunday after. Let's talk about the Saturday first. So I-305 was closed. Now, hear me out if you think I'm making a review without riding I-305. I have been on I-305. It's a great ride. Strong intensity and all, but I find it less fun than the other Gigas, so while it is a top 40 coaster, I don't think it's much higher than that. I plan to get some redemption rides, but it did not work out on my most recent visit. So that doesn't quite help the park as much, where a lot of people would call it the number 1 roller coaster, and that's the first thing that kind of holds it back. But now, on the note of why I-305 was closed, I was told it was a mix of weather and staffing issues, and it had not opened at all at that point of the year, and it's possible that as I'm recording this, it still is not opened, and it's late April. So I understand, there are issues like that sometimes, but quite frankly, Top Thrill Dragster could have run in the weather that I experienced, and Top Thrill Dragster does not run. I assume there's probably some cost thing going on in there. The ride might be more expensive to run than others, and there were pretty low crowds, so maybe they'd be losing money. But there is one thing I'd like to suggest for Kings Dominion in the future. If any higher up at Kings Dominion is watching, take a page out of Busch Gardens Williamsburg's books, and announce on the website if a ride is not open for the season yet. With all due respect, I think it's a little bit of a scammy thing to do to not say your ride is going to be closed when it's the star attraction of your park, and you know it's going to be closed. I'd gone to Busch Gardens Williamsburg not long before, and they said on the website that Pantheon and Griffin were down. So there was nothing of an issue at Busch Gardens Williamsburg there, and I think doing this at Kings Dominion, it could lead to less disappointment in the future, and I think it's just a good way to do it. I should also note Grizzly was being retracked, so I didn't ride that one, have not ridden that one before ever, but that one's not going to be one where I think anyone's going to say, you missed Grizzly, you missed the park. I don't think it's really that great from what I hear, but let's discuss the visit that I did actually get to experience. So we first headed to Twisted Timbers. Twisted Timbers for me is the best ride in the park. It is an upper tier RMC, not necessarily high tier, but pretty close. I think it is a good ride, primarily for the airtime. Though I can't help but feel like this one is basically just a smaller version of Steel Vengeance. The barrel roll drop is something unique. I do like that drop quite a bit. I haven't done any others like it before, so I like that a lot. All of the big 3 camelbacks after the 1 overbank are awesome. The ride's pacing does not dwindle the whole way through. It is a very strong ride. I'd say it probably beats most of these Six Flags RMCs, being behind only Iron Rattler and Twisted Colossus. And then for me, of course, is behind my favorites Iron Gwazi and Steel Vengeance. It is a great ride. It is a top 25 roller coaster for sure, top 20 probably. So that is a good number 1 for the park, and definitely something that helps the park go up a little bit in my rankings compared to where it could if this were just kind of another Twisted Cyclone level RMC. Also rode Apple Zapple. Apple Zapple is a decent wild mouse, and I consider it the 10th best roller coaster in the park. It's fine, not much else to say about the wild mouse though, besides having a pretty fun name. And right next door to that is Racer 75. This is a solid racing wooden coaster with some great airtime, and one really jarring painful moment. The ride did not race when I went, but I didn't mind too much. I would say this is the 6th best roller coaster in the park, and compared to Kings Island, where Racer would probably be 7th, that's not too bad. It is one less great roller coaster to be above the good standard wooden racing coaster, so that's not a bad look for the park at all. Now I should note, the walk from Racer to Tumbili. Tumbili is on the opposite side of the park, in the new Jungle Expedition area, and walking here, it made me realize that this is the worst looking of the Cedar Fair parks I mentioned. Some rides such as I-305, Dominator, Anaconda, and Twisted Timbers look great, but others look haphazardly placed, and they're less appealing, compared to other Cedar Fair parks especially. The buildings look cheaper. It really has the atmosphere of a low-tier Six Flags park. And I tend to think Six Flags parks don't look awful, but the lower-tier ones, that's not a favorable comparison. International Street feels really small compared to Kings Island's, and it just doesn't have the same charm. Jungle Expedition is the nicest looking area, but it still feels cluttered, with some areas having too much space and some areas having too little. And the other great Cedar Fair parks, I feel, comparatively, have gorgeous appearances. Cedar Point has the wonderful setting, the best looking roller coasters by far, and the phenomenal Frontier Town. Kings Island has that great terrain usage, more impressive looking rides, and the better themed areas such as River Country and Area 72. Knott's Berry Farm has Ghost Town, which is probably the best themed area in the whole chain, and in general that one just beats the rest. Canada's Wonderland, a phenomenal centerpiece, the great medieval area, and the wonderful looking B&Ms and other rides. And Carowinds is probably next weakest, but it still has significantly more photogenic rides and a more consistent southern theme and atmosphere. But on the note of Jungle Expedition, I was here and I like the theme. Some aspects look quite nice, and that is a plus for the appearance overall, even if the overall appearance is a bit overrated, where I hear people say, "You don't understand, Kings Dominion is more than the roller coasters, it's also a wonderful looking park." It looks fine, but no, this park's definitely built more on the roller coasters. Speaking of which, tumbili was next. This is the newest roller coaster at the park as of my visit. It is a free spin. S&S 40 free spins are interesting rides, where the car just spins on its own, and you'll be flipping upside down several times on certain occasions. Sometimes you don't flip at all. These are common in the Six Flags chain, often called the Joker or Batman the Ride. The main thing that stands out here though, this one is smaller than those. You only go through 2 laps instead of the typical 3, and as a result, this ride feels short. I was genuinely disappointed by a free spin, which is unusual. I don't think it's a bad ride, but it doesn't have the intense flipping of the others, and it feels like it's over way too quickly, so it just kinda happens. If not for going upside down, this would be a family coaster for sure. And I would say it is number 9 at the park. Number 9 is not a bad honor here, but still, it's not a great ride. Probably the biggest letdown of the trip, and that's including the closure of I-305. I should also talk about operations now, because this is where the operations really sank. Tumbili was running 1 train that could hold 8 people. Most other rides have 1 train, sure, but those trains seat a lot more than 8 people. As a result, Tumbili's line was around 30 minutes, when the rest were no more than 10 in the entire park. Even for Front Row on Twisted Timbers, it was shorter. The park was quiet when I went, and I have to say, I recommend hitting Tumbili very early on if you want to ride it, especially on busy days, because you're going to have to wait a long time if the operations continue like that. The ride is just too small to hold a lot of trains, and I will say, capacity is a big issue there, but the dispatches were not too fast either. I'd say there were some rides where the crews were doing a phenomenal job. Shout out to Dominator, I'll get to them more later. But unfortunately, Tumbili is the one ride where it really feels like, how are you sitting in the car for 5 minutes before you start going? And it's the one that's kind of messing with the whole system of capacity and lines throughout the entire park. That's another thing I think could be improved in the future at the park. And in terms of Tumbili itself, I'm genuinely upset we lost the Crypt for it, because the Crypt was an awesome flat ride. But let's move on to Reptilian. Reptilian is a fun bobsled coaster. I'd say it has intense turns, some jarring transitions, but it is number 7 in the park. Definitely a good ride, family coaster for sure, but not a bad family coaster by any means, and I would recommend it for thrill seekers. Now let's talk about Anaconda. I want that, because Anaconda is an underrated gem. I got smooth rides, and one was bumpier but not as bad as I could have expected, and I dare say it's one of the smoothest aero loopers. The corkscrews are slow, but that works. It allows you to get good hang time over the water, and it does not feel nearly as painful. I didn't hit my head basically at all. The setting is great, the ride is intense, and it might be the best of aero loopers, and it is my number 5 in the park. Massively overlooked ride. And right next door to that, we have Flight of Fear. Flight of Fear is my favorite Spaghetti Bowl ride, particularly the Kings Dominion one actually. Kings Dominions beat Kings Islands because it is more disorienting and consistently smoother. It is a great final third that is quite fast, and the inversion at the end is a particular standout. The theme is good. I do wish there were less lights to have that darker, chaotic feel. I'd say so. It is number 4 in the park based on that. The less light thing isn't keeping it from being top 3 or anything. It's just one minor thing I think can make the ride a bit more thrilling and fun. Now I-305 is nearby, and I realize that the best rides are basically as far from each other as possible. I get that that's just how they worked out, with where there was space and such, but if you are trying to get on only the main 3 rides, I-305, Twisted Timbers, and Dominator, do note you're going to walk a lot with little reward. But the rides are actually worth it, so there is some reward there, but do keep in mind that makes the layout a bit weaker, and as a matter of fact, I noticed walking around, the layout overall is not great, based on the fact that a lot of attractions block what would otherwise be very good paths. And then you have Jungle Expedition, which is so much open space, and the rides are kind of crammed into a small area of it. It's kind of weird. I will say, most Cedar Fair parks, I can look at a map when I get there, just at the front entrance, and then I'll have a great idea of where to go. Sometimes I need no map at all. For Kings Dominion, I was frequently looking at the park map to find out where to go. So while it is not a huge knock against the park, I think it's sometimes a little negative of an experience to be walking around and not knowing where you're going in a park, especially when there isn't a whole lot to look at or do. So Kings Dominion is a good park, but there is a little more I need to cover here. For example, Backlot Stunt Coaster is right next door to the Flight of Fear and Anaconda stuff. This ride has been cloned to other parks, and some of them, mainly Kings Island, has a cool theme section in the middle. Here the effects did not run, which is kind of funny, but the ride itself, it's good. It is intense, it is more thrilling than the Kings Island one for me, the indoor parts work better, and this one I would call number 8 in the park. Now for some real positivity though. So I have just kind of dissed the operations, the layout, the appearance, and some of the roller coasters, but there is one ride here that makes this park for me. Dominator. Dominator is an awesome and super underrated ride. It is the best of B&M floorless coasters, my favorite because it is intense, fast, well-paced, a long duration, and has the best vertical loop of maybe any roller coaster. It is number 3 in the park based on my rankings of which one is most thrilling and stuff, but in a certain way, it's my favorite. I rode it the most on the trip, even with Twisted Timbers right there, and I think everything about it is great. The crews were dispatching trains super quickly, so the line was never more than 5 minutes. Even for front row, you can get on in like 10. It was run super well, huge props to the Dominator crew for sure. A lot of the crews were doing well, but I think Dominator was the standout. I adore everything about this ride. It's so much fun, and I would definitely in a way say it is the number 1 roller coaster Kings Dominion for me, even though in a ranking I would call Twisted Timbers and I-305 better rides. After this, I left the park. I was only there for 2.5 hours, but because it was a very quiet day, every roller coaster I named, I rode on the first day. That is unusual, but I was happy with that. And the fact that it was the off-season is definitely a big reason why certain things were the way they were. I want to assume that the operations for tumbili and the opening of I-305 is less of a problem in peak season like summer. However, I can see where the problem would still exist because there's so many more people to handle. So I wish Kings Dominion the best of luck with the summer 2023 season in regards to handling Tumbili's operations. The next day I did all of these rides again, added Woodstock Express to the mix. That was number 11 in the park. It is a solid family coaster, but that is my whole experience. Overall, this park is good. I had a lot of fun, but a mix of being underwhelmed by certain elements, and the fact that doing a critical analysis compared to the other parks makes it seem a bit worse, that does hold it back. One thing I will point out is that everyone says the top 2 roller coasters of Kings Dominion are what bolster it, what make it a great park, I-305 and Twisted Timbers. I disagree, because off the top of my head, I prefer the top 2 roller coasters at Cedar Point Six Flags New England, Kings Island, Busch Gardens Tampa, Six Flags Magic Mountain, Six Flags Great Adventure, and more. That said, there are 8 solid roller coasters here, with some super underrated ones, good flat rides, a fine appearance, fine layouts, fine operations. Compared to every park in the world, this is upper tier, good, definitely worth visiting. Though maybe because I've only happened to have gone to, so far anyway, the best Cedar Fair parks, this one seems worse than those, and that's why it's been negative comparisons. The aspects I've been criticizing, they're decent, they're just not great. I'm not trying to give a negative review of the park, I'm not trying to say the park is bad by any means, but I do want to say that it is a bit overrated based on my experience, and while it is still worth going into with an open mind and such, I'm just giving my personal experience, and it is a good park, but not as good as the aforementioned Cedar Fair stuff along with Busch Gardens Williamsburg. I only made a few Kings Island comparisons, which is actually very beneficial for the park, because comparing Kings Island to Kings Dominion is like Islands of Adventure to Universal Studios Florida, and that's not too much of an exaggeration. Overall, I do recommend this park if you're in the area, but if you had the choice between this and the other Cedar Fair parks I named, I would suggest going to one of those other Cedar Fair parks first, unless the top 2 roller coasters really speak to you. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. Comment down below your thoughts on Kings Dominion. I hope this did not hurt anyone too harshly. Subscribe for more theme park content. I'll see you next time.